Your tomatoes were growing so fast in May that you fed them twice without thinking much about it. Everything looked perfect. Thick stems, dark green leaves, and the first flower cluster opening right on schedule. Then June arrived, and suddenly the same plant was dropping flowers, curling leaves, and getting thicker at the exact same time. The top 6 inches of growth started rolling inward at the edges, like someone was curling each leaf into a tiny scroll. You checked the soil. The top inch felt dry, so you watered. 2 buds on that first cluster turned brown at the base and dropped off before they ever opened. You figured the plant needed another round of fertilizer to push through whatever this was, so you gave it one. 4 days after that second feeding, the curl had spread to nearly every growing tip on the plant. The color had gone from healthy dark green to something closer to blue-green, almost metallic looking under direct sun. The second flower cluster started drying at the stem before a single bud opened. And underneath all of that, the oldest leaves near the base, the ones that had been there since transplant, started turning yellow at the edges and dropping, even while the main stem kept getting visibly thicker. That last detail matters more than it looks, because those symptoms are not supposed to happen together. Thick stems, dropped flowers, and yellowing lower leaves normally point in different directions. Seeing all 3 at once is what makes this so confusing. That should not be happening. I spent one June trying to chase this exact pattern with more water and another feeding every few days, certain the next round would be the one that fixed it. The bush only got worse, faster, until I borrowed a cheap soil thermometer from a neighbor just to rule out the obvious. The afternoon air felt warm enough for shorts. 4 inches down near the roots, the reading was barely above 50. That reading was the first clue that I had been solving the wrong problem the entire time. I stopped feeding the plant altogether, stepped back, and just let the soil dry out properly between waterings for the first time all season. It took the better part of 2 weeks before I saw any real change. One of the first signs I noticed was the curl beginning to relax on some of the older leaves. If you've ever stood over a tomato bed staring at buds on the ground, you know this feeling. You water. Nothing changes. You feed it again. The curl gets worse. You did everything the seed packet told you to do, and the plant is acting like you did something wrong. No spots, no wilting, no obvious pest damage. Just curl, drop, and a stem that refuses to slow down. Soil in early June often holds nighttime cold much longer than the air above it does. A cool night, or repeated heavy watering with cold water, can keep the soil around the roots much colder than gardeners expect, even on a day that feels warm at noon. Phosphorus uptake can slow dramatically once soil sits in that range for more than a day or two, even though the phosphorus itself is sitting right there in the soil, fully available on paper. This is not the only cause of flower drop in June, but it is one of the most commonly overlooked ones. If your plant is dark green, thick-stemmed, and dropping flowers, that combination is already a clue that more fertilizer may be the exact opposite of what it needs. The tricky part is that nitrogen doesn't slow down the same way phosphorus does. It often stays available in cool soil long after phosphorus has stalled out, so the plant keeps absorbing it at close to full speed. Too much nitrogen often pushes the plant toward leafy growth at the exact moment you want it focusing on flowers instead. Phosphorus and potassium are the nutrients your plant leans on when it is trying to hold flowers and build tomatoes. When one half of that pair keeps running and the other shuts down, you end up with a thick, leafy, dark plant that cannot hold on to its own flowers. It also explains one of the stranger parts of all this. The plant looks stronger than ever, exactly when its flower clusters are getting weaker. That combination is one of the biggest clues you're dealing with a root problem rather than a feeding problem. The part causing all this trouble was sitting below the soil the entire time. Fine root hairs do most of the actual work underground, and they are usually the first thing to suffer in cold, repeatedly soaked soil. The surprising part is that calcium can already be sitting in the soil in plenty. The problem is that damaged roots cannot move it where the fruit needs it, and that shortage tends to surface weeks later, when the bottom of a tomato turns dark and sunken, even though the plant looked perfectly fine back in June. The curl itself is where most gardeners get fooled. because three completely different problems can produce a nearly identical role at the top of the plant. Touch is the fastest way to tell them apart. Leaves curling from nitrogen excess feel stiff and almost rubbery, with a dark color carrying a slight blue cast. Leaves curling from simple drought stress feel soft and slightly limp, with a lighter, more washed-out green. Press a curled leaf between two fingers. At that point, adding more water can easily send you in the wrong direction if it feels thick and unyielding rather than soft. There is a third version of this same curl that has nothing to do with either nitrogen or drought. On days when air temperature climbs past 90 degrees for several hours, tomato leaves roll upward on their own to cut down how much sun they expose to direct light. This kind of curl shows up across the whole plant at once rather than starting at the top, and it relaxes back to normal once the evening cools off. A leaf that looks curled at 2 in the afternoon and flat by sunset is not in trouble. That one sorts itself out without any help from you at all. The dropping lower leaves complete the picture, and they are telling you something about oxygen rather than nutrients. Roots sitting in soil that stays wet for too long lose access to oxygen the same way any living tissue would, because water displaces the air pockets roots depend on to function. Starting with the oldest leaves, the plant sheds tissue to cut its own demand while the stem above keeps thickening on whatever nitrogen it can still process. A thick stem paired with yellowing, dropping lower leaves usually means the roots are gasping, not starving. This is why adding more fertilizer often backfires in June. The plant is trying to set the flower clusters that will become your main summer harvest, and each cluster gets roughly a 3-week window to lock in before it either sets fruit or aborts for good. A cluster lost now does not come back later in the season, no matter how well the plant performs after that. Those low leaves carry a second cost beyond blocking light from reaching anything useful. Splash from rain or watering throws soil particles, and the fungal spores riding on them, straight onto leaf tissue sitting only a few inches off the ground. Early blight and septoria both get their start exactly this way, which means a struggling June plant is often quietly being set up for a disease problem that will not show itself for weeks, long after you thought the worst of it had already passed. Once you know what you're looking at, the fix becomes much simpler. Before you water again, push a finger 2 inches into the soil near the roots, rather than judging by the surface, since the surface dries faster than the root area ever feels it. Many beds can go several days longer than you think without water once you are checking at the right depth, instead of trusting how the top inch looks. When you do water, give it a deep soak that reaches 8 to 10 inches down, rather than a handful of shallow waterings. And do it in the morning, so foliage is not sitting wet overnight. Cut away every leaf within 6 to 8 inches of the soil line using a clean blade rather than pulling them off by hand, since a torn wound takes longer to seal and gives disease an easier opening. These leaves are barely helping the plant at that point anyway, and removing them closes off the splash pathway that feeds early blight before it ever gets started. If you prune your tomatoes, thin out vigorous side shoots crowding the base of a flower cluster too. That shoot is pulling from the same resources as the cluster sitting right next to it. And plenty of gardeners skip pruning altogether and still get a strong harvest. So treat this as one tool rather than a requirement. Take a hand cultivator and loosen the top inch of soil around the base of each plant without digging deep enough to disturb roots. Breaking up that surface crust lets oxygen back down to a root system that has been sitting in saturated ground. And that single pass often shows visible improvement within a few days, sometimes faster than gardeners expect from something this small. If you feel like the plant needs feeding at all right now, reach for something low in nitrogen and built for flowering rather than a balanced or high nitrogen blend, and only apply it after watering plain water first, never into dry soil. A 2 to 3 inch layer of dry straw or dried grass clippings over the soil surface keeps the root area steadier through cool nights, cuts down how often you need to water, and stops soil and disease spores from splashing back onto the plant. The hardest part of all of this is doing less when every visual cue is screaming at you to do more. The curl, the dropped buds, the yellowing lower leaves against that thick, healthy-looking stem, all of it reads as a plant begging for help. What it is actually asking for is room to recover from too much of exactly the kind of help you already gave it. For many in ground tomatoes, avoid adding extra water just because the surface looks dry. Containers dry out much faster and need their own separate check, sometimes daily in hot weather. Take the low leaves off. Loosen that crust. Then leave it alone for a few days. Check the growing tip again in 2 weeks. A tip that has gone soft, light green, and is actively reaching upward again is a good sign the root system is recovering. Flower clusters that are holding rather than dropping mean you caught this in time, because if you catch this now, you are not saving a leaf. You are saving the harvest you were counting on later this summer. If your tomatoes are doing this exact thing right now, drop the variety in your zone in the comments, because every garden behaves differently. And if this stopped you from adding another round of fertilizer today, give it a like so more gardeners see it before they make the exact same mistake.